What's up, Yinzers, Yinzettes? Welcome back to the first episode of season 2 of Pucksnet. We're going to give you the latest downtime breakdowns and everything from the past week in Penguins hockey. In case you've been living under a rock, there was quite some big news this week with the departure of Mike Sullivan from the Penguins. And I do have a special guest today, so we're going to go over all that, much more than that. And I would like to introduce my special guest, recurring guest, I should say, and that's Hunter Hodies from Locked On. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a crazy week here. It's probably going to be a pretty crazy offseason these next couple of months.
Absolutely. Crazy week describes it. And we can kind of just jump right from there. So on Monday, the shocking news, I'd say it's shocking anyway, came out that Kyle Dubas and the Penguins had, parted ways with head coach Mike Sullivan. He's been with the Penguins for a decade, obviously back-to-back Stanley Cups in 2016, 2017, and 3 consecutive missed postseason appearances. I think this is news that a lot of people were expecting at some point. The timing, I think, was a little bit surprising, just given the circumstances where the Penguins are at. And the fact that it, kept being reiterated that he might be, the guy to lead them through this rebuild. But Hunter, I just wanted to get your thoughts on, the departure and what this might mean.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was stunned when I saw it. I mean, it's funny. I woke up at 9:20, 20 minutes after the announcement, and I had like 30 plus text messages on my phone and a bunch of DMs. And I was like, what the heck just happened? And then I look at Twitter. I'm like, so this happened. And I got to say, like, again, I was really caught off guard. I mean, Mike Sullivan, when he met with the media during locker room cleanout day, kind of said, like, yeah, I expect to be back. Like, I'm going to talk with Kyle Dubas and stuff like that. And then, Kyle, I understand that some people read into some of his comments when he spoke to the media a couple of days later. I personally didn't read into them that much. I kind of read them as like, oh, he's just going to talk to Mike Sullivan about the offseason plan. Some other people were like, no, like he kind of beat around the bush a little bit. And I just didn't take it seriously. Probably should have after, because he ended up letting him go. And I know they had the description of it was a mutual parting of ways. That wasn't how Kyle Dubas kind of described it during the press conference. He basically got fired is what it sounds like. And this is something that Kyle kind of admitted that he had been thinking about for a while. What was really interesting was that he said he was considering it at times during the season. Like he even, when the team was playing really poorly, he's like, yeah, like it was something that I was really thinking about during the season. It's been something that's been on my mind for a while. He just felt like they needed a fresh voice. And, I'll always have the utmost respect for Mike Sullivan. I think he's the best head coach in franchise history. I understand the end of his tenure did not go very swimmingly. I probably would have moved on 1 year ago, if not maybe 2, but it was still overall time for a change in terms of who can be the bench boss. Like it's going to be obviously hard to replace him. Who knows if the next coach is even going to be there by the time they're contending again in a few years, but it was still time for a fresh voice, I think, behind the bench. I just didn't think they were actually going to do it. I thought his seat was cold.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I wouldn't necessarily concur with it being cold, but it was definitely at the most like lukewarm.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 things that stood out to me about this, and I think the reason I don't want to say it was a shock, because I think a shock's a little bit of an overstatement. This is something that's been discussed for a long time, whether in fan circles, media circles, and Dubas said, as you mentioned, that this is something that was culminating throughout the season. It wasn't just, a just now decision. But 2 things that kind of stood out to me, I think back to some of Sullivan's last press conferences with the media and just him meeting with us and talking to us about, the outlook of this team. And, to me, it kind of seems like maybe they just weren't on the same page anymore. Because, in these last couple press conferences we had with Sullivan and even the season ending press conference, this whole idea kept being presented of, this rebuild on the fly. And he kept kind of contending that, hey, like, I think we have some pieces here to be able to take the next step forward and accelerate this. And he was kind of speaking on that, which isn't something he had been doing, the rest of the season. This is something that was relatively new. And granted, it's something that, we as media members were asking about late in the season. But I mean, he was pretty candid in the way that he was talking about that. And you have to wonder if part of it was just that maybe their timelines didn't match up. And maybe this is something that they, didn't see eye to eye on in terms of where the organization is at. The other thing that sticks out to me, and I could argue endlessly with people on twitter.com and social media, wherever, about Sullivan and his approach to young players. I do think a lot of that, and Kyle Dubas even acknowledged this in his presser where he was like, we don't listen to this outside noise. We know what people were saying. That didn't factor into any kind of decision. And I do believe that. But I mean, I think it is also worth wondering. Dubas kept kind of emphasizing development when he was talking about, the next coach of the Penguins and where they want to go with this. And development is kind of the word that kept coming up. And to me, the fact that it seems like they want to look more in the direction of hiring a coach that specializes in development and specializes in young players might give a little bit of a clue as to why they didn't think Sullivan was the right guy for the job anymore. Now, in terms of the narrative of young players, the Penguins haven't had young players for, since the Cup years. I mean, this is really the first time we've seen them have legitimate prospects in that time. Or since that time. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that he didn't deploy those guys, but at the same time, the fact that they want to emphasize development and emphasize a coach who works well with these young players, I think kind of speaks volumes without Kyle Dubas directly saying anything about that.
And I think that also kind of shows the type of coach that they want to hire. I don't think you're going to see a retread here like a Peter Laviolette. I don't see that. I've seen people ask me about John Tortorella. Don't see that. Would be hilarious content-wise, that's for sure, considering how much he's trashed the Penguins over the years. But that's not going to be happening. In fact, if Mike Sullivan does take this Rangers job, and all indications are that he's probably going to, would be kind of funny if Torts found his way back to New York and was an assistant on Sullivan's staff. I think it's going to be more than likely a younger coach who's maybe never coached as a full-time head coach in the NHL before. Obviously, the big name is David Carl. I mean, everyone's been going after him, and for good reason. I mean, he is a great coach for the University of Denver. He's done a great job there. Though, again, I only think he's going to leave for the NHL for the right opportunity. I don't think the Penguins are that right opportunity, just being objective about that. Now, if they were to get him, that's great, but I don't think this is the right opportunity for him, at least right now, in my opinion. I think he probably will want to go somewhere that's ready to win right now. Todd Nelson, I think he's also a candidate that could be on Kyle Dubas's list. It's going to be someone in that vicinity, I think, Kelsey, like a young coach who can really oversee the development of some of these younger pieces, someone who, also isn't going to piss off any of the core pieces, because we all know how close they were with Mike Sullivan. I mean, Sidney Crosby and him have a very close relationship. Chris Letang has said, I don't want to play for another coach. So they're going to bring in someone who I really don't think is going to ruffle any feathers in that regard either. Into the timeline differences, it is something that Pat and I have discussed on our pod quite a bit. Maybe Mike Sullivan felt like they were closer to getting back to the playoffs than what Kyle Dubas thinks. And maybe Sully was like, and I'm just purely speculating here, maybe like, hey, maybe we could be really aggressive this summer. And Kyle was just like, no, I don't really think that's the right time yet, and at least in free agency. And maybe there was some philosophical differences with how far Mike thinks the team is from getting back to contention / the playoffs, and how far Kyle thinks they're far from getting back to the playoffs. Like, for example, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year. I think 2026 is the earliest that they will at least really try getting back to the playoffs. I think they'll mobilize a little bit this summer, maybe making some trades, but I don't think it's going to be enough to the point where, oh my God, this is going to be able to be a bona fide playoff team. But it's going to be a fascinating search. Like, they're going to go, Dubas said they're going to go all over the world trying to find the next best head coach. But again, I don't think it's going to be like a retread. I would also throw even Jay Woodcroft in there. And I wouldn't even say he's a retread. He's had one coaching gig with the Oilers. I kind of felt like he got shafted a little bit there just because they had really poor goaltending. if he's not the next head coach of the Penguins, I expect him to get another job because I think he could do a good job.
Absolutely. And Woodcroft came to mind for me as well. The only situation, and I mean, I agree with you, and I think that was pretty clear in what Dubas was saying, just the kind of person that they're looking for this job. I know a couple other people that come to mind for me are Mike Hastings. He is kind of fits that mold of somebody who's really developed as a coach and worked his way up through coaching ranks. He's currently the head coach of the University of Wisconsin. And before that, he was with Minnesota State for a decade, and he kind of brought them to relevance. They made the Frozen Four a few years ago. He started in the USHL program. He was a coach and a general manager there, got coach of the year, general manager of the year. So he kind of fits that mold, I think, of somebody who's developed himself and kind of developed along with those younger players and has a good understanding of what that process looks like, all the way from juniors to college. So I think that's kind of and AHL coaches, another one that comes to mind, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this miscorrectly, but Aaron Schneekloth from Colorado system. He's been the coach of the Colorado Eagles from the time they were in the ECHL to 2 years ago when they went to the AHL. Really good track record of success there, and a really good reputation in the organization, especially with development. So I do think that that's, along with the guys you mentioned, Carl, Nelson, those are the kinds of guys they're probably going to be targeting because Dubas did mention in the presser too. I mean, he mentioned Spencer Carberry. He mentioned Jim Hiller, as examples of coaches that had ample experience in those developmental leagues, but didn't really have a ton of NHL experience. Carberry's case, there wasn't any. Hiller was an assistant, but I think that seems to kind of be the focus. They did say they're casting a wide net, but if I had to guess, that's probably going to be more so the direction they take. However, that said, I do think there is a small possibility, not necessarily that you see a retread, of the usual types, the Laviolettes, etc. But I do think there's a situation if they think this rebuild is going to take longer than anticipated, that we could see a kind of bridge coach sort of situation where, they might hire David Quinn, to kind of bridge those couple years. He has a little bit of familiarity with the Penguin system, obviously. This was his first season behind the bench as an assistant. He helped revive their power play. He's worked with the defense, with overtime. So he's made some improvements in small areas, but it's not like he's been around long enough to have Sullivan's system ingrained. There's, room for him to make some changes. I could see something like that. You mentioned Woodcroft. I could even see somebody like, Jeremy Colleton from New Jersey. He's had a couple brief stints. He was coach of the Blackhawks for a couple years after Quenneville was originally fired. Didn't go well there. He's now an assistant coach for New Jersey. So even in the arena of retreads, so to speak, I think if that's the case, it'll be more of a bridge scenario where they're looking for a guy to bridge that contention window. And the only other situation I could see is Rick Tocchet. I tend to believe that that's more or less another Mike Sullivan that you're bringing in. So, but I from what I understand and from what's been uttered in hockey circles and just common knowledge, Rick Tocchet does have a very good reputation with younger players, and a reputation for development in that sense, and just working well with younger players. If there's a true retread in the sense, I think it's him. If there's not, then it's going to be one of those guys that are either bridge coach or just out of those developmental leagues, like you said. But either way, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they kind of navigate this process given the window, and whatever their perceived window is, because Dubas made a good point. You don't see coaches win championships, fall off into rebuild mode and come out of it on the other side and be there for the competition window again. You just don't see that. You don't see that. So the move was understandable. I do think it was time. And and I agree with the move, but it'll just be interesting to see what type of hire, whether it's, a bridge person or somebody that they see kind of seeing both ends of this thing, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In terms of David Quinn, for me, like, I feel like you only hire him unless every other one of your top candidates says no to you, or unless you are like bona fide tanking this year. And I
Yeah.
mean like San Jose, Chicago level tanking. I don't think that's the plan this year for the Penguins. I think, especially when you look at free agency, they're probably going to do some similar moves like you saw last year. The big moves, if they decide to make those will be via trade. Like, and I obviously trust Kyle Dubas a lot more with his trades than I do some of his free agency signings, at least so far in his tenure, though a lot of that is due to his first summer and not really having a staff in place. But again, I feel like you only really hire Quinn unless you're tanking or you just don't have any other candidates and they just all told you no. So, and also I think David Quinn could potentially follow Mike Sullivan to wherever he goes. Like say even Torella doesn't follow Sullivan. He wants to like take a year or two off, something like that. Mike Sullivan takes that Rangers job. He could reach out to David Quinn saying like, hey, I want you here with me in New York. Even though David Quinn was the head coach of the Rangers before and it didn't go well, like he could still reach out to him and see if he would be interested. So I could very much see that as well.
Yeah, I could too. And I agree with you. I don't think Quinn's a situation unless they're really planning on like milking this thing next year and tanking. And I completely agree with that standpoint. That's why I think it'll be interesting to see how they approach this, because they said there was going to be a really wide net cast. I think they're going to basically talk to every possible person. Anybody who's calling, they're going to be reaching out to a lot of people. So, it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do in that arena. And I also think it could speak for, what their timeline might be and what the direction of this might be. Because like I said, and like you said, if they hire someone like a retread, like a David Quinn, that kind of tells you that, hey, this is going to be longer term than people think it's going to be. But if, they go out and get someone like a David Carl, and he's a very sought after coach, by the way. I mean, this guy is very sought after. The Ducks have talked to him. I heard Vancouver had talked to him. So, there are teams that are really, he's very sought after. If Mike Sullivan's up here, I'd say David Carl and Rick Tocchet are probably about here. So it's kind of, it'll be interesting to see if that's the kind of guy that they go after. If they can get their hands on David Carl, I think that speaks to them having confidence that they can get a lot out of the young players that they have and whoever they're going to be adding, just with his track record. And this is probably somebody that could hang around to their window of contention. Because I think it's kind of, in the same ilk of someone like a Spencer Carberry, in that situation. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And I do want to jump back to Sullivan for a second, because it has been lightly reported, nothing's confirmed at this point, that Sullivan looks to be the next coach of the New York Rangers. If that's true, I think this is something that we all saw coming. I don't think this is really a surprise to anybody. Just knowing Sullivan, he's a family guy. I don't think he would have packed up and moved to the West Coast unless it was a really good opportunity, a really good sales pitch that he couldn't pass up. So honestly, I mean, I saw this ending in New York or Boston. And you don't know what kind of conflict of interest there would have been in Boston with Charlie McAvoy there, who's Sullivan's son-in-law, in case you aren't in the loop there. And then also, too, I mean, if, this does take longer, if nothing's confirmed about the Rangers, I think something else to consider, too, there's 8 teams without head coaches right now. There's a really big coaching carousel, lots of vacancies. You have Pittsburgh, you have Boston, you have the Rangers, the Kraken, the Ducks, the Flyers, the Canucks, and the Chicago Blackhawks. So there's kind of a wide range of teams there. You have some of these teams that are in full rebuild mode, like the Blackhawks. And then you have some of these teams that are going to be kind of on the brink. Rangers, you're thinking Vancouver, just some of these teams that are up and coming, like Philly, like Anaheim. So there's a lot of opportunities for different coaches. I always thought, and I maintain, that Mike Sullivan probably wants to go somewhere that's more on the brink of contention rather than going through this rebuild process. But it's also worth considering, that if he isn't scooped up by somebody in the next couple days, some of these first round exit teams in the playoffs, there is still a possibility that there could be more coaching vacancies on the way. So I guess Hunter, if he doesn't end up with the Rangers, and we're hearing rumors out of Tampa Bay that John Cooper might be out. Do you see another potential landing spot for Sullivan other than New York or other than Boston?
I think Chicago would be interesting. He's worked for the Blackhawks before. So if he doesn't go to the Rangers, for example, I'd have to think the Blackhawks would be interested in talking with him. I'm sure the Ducks would want to talk to him as well. Like, they've talked a lot already this offseason. We want to make the playoffs next year. We want to make the playoffs next year. Now, I don't know if the Ducks are a playoff team heading into next year right now. I would probably lean towards no. We have to see what they do during the offseason. But he wants to go to a team that is ready to win right now. The Rangers. Like, that makes a ton of sense. Like, the way they were talking after the offseason, after their season ended, they don't want to go into this retool rebuild. Like, they want to keep contending with this core group. We can laugh all we want at them just because, some of their players are a bit older now. They may not win with this core group, but that's not how the Rangers front office is thinking. So if they hire Mike Sullivan, it's going to be because they think they can make the playoffs next year and they think they can keep contending with a better head coach, just because Peter Laviolette was not good this year. But, you mentioned Boston. I think they're going to maybe try to rebuild. I don't think it's wise for them to keep trying to contend at this rate. But Chicago, even though they're far away, like, I could see them having interest in him because he's worked there before, but I'm still not sure if he would fully take that job. Again, Anaheim would be interesting. I don't think Vancouver is going to get him. That they are going to talk to, I'm sure, a whole bunch of people, but still, the Rangers are very much the odds-on favorite. I mean, they were waiting for him to be available. I mean, they've been waiting for him to be available these last 2 years, honestly. So it feels like it's only a matter of time before this happens. So I hope most Penguins fans are probably ready to see him coach against the Penguins however many times, like 3 to 4 to 5 times a year. They're so weird with the divisions now. Some teams you'll play 3 times, some teams you'll play 4. I've even seen you guys play like 5 times a year. It's usually somewhere in that ballpark. But hey, it's going to be fascinating to see how he does there if he does get that gig.
Yeah, and I do think, I would think that Sullivan is the exact kind of voice that they need.
Yeah.
Over in New York. This is an example of a team. I think at this point, they're kind of in a similar situation that the Penguins were a few years ago. They have some of their stars aging out, a lot of them underperforming. They have younger players who are underperforming. Lafreniere comes to mind there. So it'll be interesting kind of just to see what he can get out of those guys, especially with the heavy forechecking system that he's deployed in Pittsburgh. I think, just in a nutshell, this is kind of, if he's hired there, this is kind of their last ditch attempt to really try to, contend with this core. Because, if you remember, last year, this was a President's Trophy team. It was a mess this year for a lot of reasons. And I think it was kind of a combination of the team underperforming, but also just maybe overperforming the last couple seasons, because we've seen, this hasn't been a great 5-on-5 team for years. This isn't a new thing. Goaltending kind of filled a lot of those holes that were on their roster, and filled a lot of those deficiencies. I think Shesterkin was a lot more human this season than he has been. Still really, really good, but a little bit more human. And, it's hard to work around an aging roster with a lot of money locked up in a franchise goaltender. And like I said, it just seems like there's underperformance across the board. There were a lot of distractions this season that fed into everything. But I still think they're going to have to do a little bit of an overhaul this summer. if they really want to talk about competing, that starts with the coach, and they kind of check that box. I think he's the right guy if that's the case, if he's going there. But they're going to have to make some changes this summer to really push them over the edge. And I don't think this window is going to be a long one if they can't figure something out really quickly.
Well, they need to change their organizational philosophy of just
Yeah.
not relying on your goaltender to just win you every single game. Like they've been doing this for 20 years, going back to prime Henrik Lundqvist. And yeah, like you can get to the playoffs, you can go on some deep runs, but you haven't won a title with that philosophy. So I think the Rangers just really have to change that. And it's funny, like I feel like they need a lot of help on the back end, but they have a lot of their defensemen signed for next season. So it's not going to be easy for Chris Drury to move out some of these defensemen, bring in some new ones. It's going to be pretty tough. And the Rangers everyone knows, like they were horrible in their own zone this year. I think Mike Sullivan can clean that up as much as he can. But I mean, you look at the personnel that he will have as of right now. If he takes that Rangers job, you look at that Rangers back end. Like I know Adam Fox is tremendous. Keandre Miller, he's a little inconsistent, but when he's on, he's still good. But outside of that, there's not a lot on that blue line that I really like. And then up front forward wise, a lot of their top players are, kind of out of their peak years. So it's going to be tough to make some big changes there. I'm sure they're going to try, but it feels like they may have potentially missed like their prime window to win a championship. That could change, but that's how it feels right now.
I agree. And it's not like they have a ton in their system either. I mean, this is kind of a pretty dry prospect pool. So a lot of the changes they're going to have to make are going to be kind of on the fly changes for the NHL roster. Now, obviously they went out and got JT Miller. That helps, but you can't be relying on your power play. You can't be relying on goaltending. It's not a sustainable winning strategy. I think they went on a little bit of a winning bender last year and this is the result. I mean, they're just not, those deficiencies are being exposed. As you said, they're terrible in their own end. And I think a lot of their blue liners were really underperforming this season. I mean, you talk about the forwards all you want, Zibanejad, Kreider, you talk about those guys. I think their back end was just as bad, if not worse. And something interesting too. I mean, Kyle Dubas has talked about how he wants to explore the market for left defensemen. He made a point to say that in his presser, that they're really going to try to shore up that left side because he flat out basically said that he doesn't think Owen Pickering's ready for that top pair role yet. I would agree. Ryan Graves has obviously not worked out. There's higher expectations there.
There's nobody that can play top pairing minutes on the left side right now. They will have to make a trade for that player. You look at free agency, Kelsey, not good. I would not pay any of those guys a lot of term, a lot of money in free agency. No. You will probably have to trade for someone. Like, offer sheets are out there, but I didn't get the vibe that he really wants to go down that road because he kind of hinted that it's easier for teams to match them this year.
Yes. And I asked that question. And when he said the thing about offer sheets, it makes you wonder if he's going to try to get ahead of it a little bit and, trade for RFA rights. You think of somebody like Bowen Byram on Buffalo. Buffalo's kind of another one of those teams that are in a little bit of a hellscape because there's going to be some big decisions made by the Sabres this summer because they have a young core in place. It just hasn't worked out for them. And they need to make some changes if they expect some of these guys to, be a part of their contention window. But the reason I bring this up is you wonder to some extent if maybe the Penguins target someone like Keandre Miller, or like I said, a Byram and an offer sheet, maybe a Mintyukov from Anaheim, It'll be interesting to see how the Rangers handle all that. I do think that not only do they need to shore up some of that, talent on their blue line, they also kind of need a little help on the forward front too. And if you're reading into anything that Dubas has said, I do think there are going to be some forwards available, that this offseason. You think of Rickard Rakell, you think of Brian Rust. It'll be kind of interesting to see if they kind of make that swap, because I know a lot of people were thinking about these as prospect-focused trades, asset-focused trades, and I think that very well could be the case. But if you can kind of leverage one of those guys to get, a left side defender, that could be something that, helps them. And I think a lot of this too will depend on where that Rangers first round pick falls, whether it's 2025 or 2026. My feeling is that the Rangers are probably going to keep that this season, because it's not like, if they kind of sell out that pick for next season, I think that kind of tells you a lot about what their philosophy and what their direction is. So, if you don't have that first round pick for the Rangers, you kind of lose a lot of that leverage assets wise that you would have to really acquire a difference making young talent. So that's a situation where I wonder if, a Raquel or a Russ is part of that package to get a legitimate left side defenseman from somewhere.
I don't think it's gonna be Russ, just because like when I was reading the press release that they put out about Mike Sullivan, they pretty clearly put him in there with the core three, and I don't think that was by accident. They see him as a core piece for this team, like a core leader, someone that they can rely on for anything in that room. And I know his full no move clause expires this summer, so he won't have any trade protection. But I don't see them moving him as of right now. That could obviously change, but I think he's still going to be on this team for quite a bit. Raquel, that's probably the one that they could potentially use for that kind of asset. And you mentioned Bowen Byram. I like him quite a bit. He had a pretty up and down year in Buffalo, though I know a lot of players in Buffalo struggled. Thing is, I dug into the data a little bit last week when I was doing a little bit of research on him. He had great numbers next to Rasmus Dahlin. But if you took Dahlin away from him, the numbers got a little bit spooky. So I think for Byram, you got to have the right partner for him if you want to make that work. Like that's all I'm saying. Like I think he has all the talent in the world. I hope that he can put it together on a bit of a more consistent basis, but I think you also have to get the partner right for someone like a Byram. So that's really what I wanted to say about him. But still, I think they're going to go through a whole bunch of extensive options for the left side, because I mean, Matt Grzelcyk is a UFA as well, Kelsey. I don't think they're going to bring him back. Like he kind of made a couple of comments during his first presser, not the Mike Sullivan one, but the one before that, where I didn't get the sense that they were going to bring him back. And I know that they may have liked his work, especially on the power play this year, but I think you can still get that type of production from a player on the power play while also having that player be a bit better at 5-on-5. Like I think there's players out there that can be way better at even strength than Grzelcyk was. And that's the way you replace someone like that. You bring in someone who's a bit younger, can still do that work on the power play, but is someone that is better in even strength situations, especially in his own zone, because Grzelcyk, he still struggled defensively, I felt like, this year. So, I mean, they're really going to have to remake a lot of that side. Like, I think Owen Pickering, I think he's going to make the team, but the two other spots to me are just wide open for next year.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And another thing too, I mean, if you're going back to Byram, if you're going back to Grzelcyk, I think what I kind of read the Grzelcyk situation as is, if they are going to, pursue some of these RFA targets, try to trade for RFA rights, et cetera, I see Grzelcyk as kind of a fallback option. If there's somebody that they miss on, if there's somebody that they can't quite reel in, from elsewhere via trade, if they're kind of just missing on some of their other targets, I can see them bringing him back on maybe a 1 or 2 year kind of bridge deal situation, just to kind of fill a need, more so, rather than, it being anything substantially meaningful. I think it's a fallback option more than anything. I don't think that it's going to be a priority for them, but it's going to be more so something that, if he's available July 3rd, July 4th, nobody's touched him yet, we don't have our guy on the left side that we want there, that's a top 4 option for them. Because as you said, as of now, there's nobody that can take those minutes. There just isn't. So they need to do something. And if they can't land the guy that they want to, I think he's the fallback option. And as far as Pickering, I do think he's going to make the team next year. I think he's going to be given every opportunity and all the space to develop into a top 4 role. I think if, Dubas and the Penguins had it their way, he's going to probably be given the space to develop on a bottom pairing role, at least to start and kind of, work his way up the lineup. because that seems to be the way they like to develop these guys anyway, which is understandable, especially with defensemen. But again, that kind of, you need to fill those roles. So it'll be interesting to see how they go about that. I'm very interested to see how they approach Ryan Graves' situation, because it really seems like I don't want to say they're done with him, but they're done. I don't think it's a situation where he'll be off the roster, but I don't think he's going to figure into any kind of plan or anything that way. So you gotta wonder if they're, willing to offload some assets to try to get out of that contract somehow, and open up that space. But I'm just very interested to see how they go about this, because Dubas also mentioned, Pickering, Brunick would have an opportunity at a roster spot, Jack St. Ivany would. But Brunick and Jack St. Ivany are both right side defensemen. And I think that situation is going to depend a lot on what happens with Erik Karlsson this summer. So, we'll see what happens, but that left side is something that they definitely need to shore up, and they need guys to fill those roles.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and especially if they do trade Erik Karlsson, I'll keep saying it until I'm blue in the face, who is replacing that production from the back end? Like, yeah, I get it. He has defensive warts. He's not good defensively. We all know that. Like, when they traded for him, he was in the 1 percentile for 5-on-5 even strength defense. You weren't getting him to play defense in his own end. You were getting him to provide you offense from the back end, but you were putting him with a partner that can really help him. You saw how that worked at the Four Nations faceoff when Matthias Ekholm was playing with him. Gustav Forsling also played with him for a time. Like, two players who are really good defensively in their own end, and they let Karlsson really go to work. Like Pettersson for a time, especially before he got moved, he was kind of that player, though he also had a little bit of a down year this year before he got dealt. But if you trade Karlsson, and I do think it's probably likely that they are going to trade him, you are going to have to bring in someone that can try, or that is going to try at least, and replace that production. But again, that's very hard. A player like that does not grow on trees. Chris Letang cannot handle those minutes anymore. Like, I love the dude. He is a all-time great, but he's also in his late 30s now. And we even saw this year, they tried playing him on the top pairing all year, Kelsey, and he struggled, especially in his own end. He also can't generate as much offensively anymore like he used to. So they will have to go. So if they trade Karlsson too, you have to get someone that can play top pairing on the left side. And then B, you're going to have to play someone to replace Karlsson. It's a lot in one offseason. It may not be something that you're able to fix in one offseason. This might be something that, if you really want to remake this entire back end, it's going to take probably multiple off seasons to fix.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of where, I'm a little bit out of the crossroads with Karlsson. I don't necessarily think that he's dealt this summer. And, even when you look into Dubas's postseason presser, GMs don't normally challenge a guy that they're trying to trade, and I'm not saying that never happens, but just the way that he was speaking, it was almost a challenge to Karlsson. Like, hey, we need you to do better. Like, we need you to be the player that we acquired, back in 2023 and what we brought you here to do. And those aren't typically words of a GM that is actively trying to, market this guy. Because, Karlsson's cap hit is a lot. Like, will take up a good chunk of any team that's going to acquire him, whether there's retention or not from the Penguins. And so, I think it's kind of 50-50. I'm kind of 50-50 on that. And also the other factor here is I wonder where the organization is with Chris Letang, and I think and this is just, again, speculation, me talking, nothing based out of anything other than observation, but you got to wonder if the organization is kind of aware of where Letang is at this point in his career. And, there's obviously he had the heart surgery at the end of the season to repair the hole in his heart, which, hopefully helps prevent strokes in the future from what I understand. So, you question his health, you just question his performance from last season. And put all these things together, maybe the Penguins feel like Chris Letang isn't, that top pairing guy anymore either. Maybe that's where they're at organizationally with him. And if that's the case, that's kind of a big problem if you trade Karlsson, because just like nobody's on the left side, and I forgot Connor Timmins, he's there too. I don't think he's a top 4 option. I see him more as a bottom pairing guy, but you have Ryan Shea, Connor Timmins, Ryan Graves, Owen Pickering, but none of those guys speak to top 4 on the left side except Pickering. But if you have that vacancy on the right side too, on the top side pairing or the top pairing, if you deal Carlson, you're kind of digging yourself a deeper hole. And I agree with you. I don't think this is something that they can fix in one off season. I don't think, and what we'll see this summer probably is setting the table type of moves. Not anything, earth shattering, nothing big, but a lot of setting the table so that they're able to position themselves to make some bigger moves next offseason. Maybe offloading Carlson's part of that. Maybe you get a left side defenseman in exchange or as part of a return for that. But it's just kind of hard to see this team generating any offense from the blue line without Carlson in the picture, unless they really, go out and get their guy on the left side.
It's going to be really tough. Again, like he was top 10 in the league in 5-on-5 scoring among defensemen this season. He was that good in terms of points among defensemen at 5-on-5. So that's going to be really hard to replace. Like, I don't think you're going to be getting an insane haul for him. Kelsey, you're going to be getting, a pick prospect, maybe a roster player you can just play in your bottom 6, something like that. Like, again, it's not going to be a big haul. Like, if he were a lot younger, I would say yes, but you look at the contract he has, you look at the year he just had, like there will be interest, and I'm sure teams would maybe pay a little bit more if the Penguins want to retain the last couple of years on his contract. But I still don't think you're going to be getting, an insane haul and a player that can come in right away and just eat up those minutes. Like, you're going to have to go out probably again via trade to go get someone that can take those minutes, because Chris Letang at this point in his career is a second or third pairing guy. And I'm not trying to disrespect him because he's played his tail off for so many seasons with the Penguins. He's played a lot of minutes, but again, he's not the same player that he used to be. So yeah, it's going to be, I think, multiple off seasons with the way they can reshape this back end. I agree with you also on Ryan Graves. Kyle Dubas really challenged Ryan Graves at his press conference last year going into year 2. And I don't think he came close to meeting those challenges that Kyle Dubas put on him. So they're not going to say it, but I'm sure they're probably thinking internally, if we can get out of this guy's contract at somehow, some way, like, we'll do it, because 4 more years at the cap that he has. I know they're in a different phase right now. They're not contending, but it's still not a contract you want on the books, even with the cap going up.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess one last thing to add there is, when you're looking at left side options and you're considering the situation with Letang, it kind of makes you wonder if they might try to kind of target more of that shutdown type guy. And if they do that, I think keeping Carlson is a little bit more palatable. Because as you said, I mean, he looked really good with Ekholm during the Four Nations tournament. And it kind of just goes to show that if you get Carlson the right partner, he can be a really effective player. And we talk about his offensive production and his ability to drive offense, but I think a lot of those defensive warts would subside a little bit if he had the right partner that kind of allows him to get to his game and play to the strengths in his game and take risks, because he hasn't had that guy. And even Pettersson, for most of the season wasn't playing up to his capabilities, or at least what we saw last season. So, if they can go out and find a guy that pairs well with Carlson, that could make a big difference, and that could make keeping him around at least, into next season, possibly looking to deal him at the trade deadline or even next offseason. That becomes a little bit more palatable if you can try to get, that shutdown guy. But who they go after on that left side, I think, will be really telling too. If they're kind of targeting a little bit more of an offense-oriented guy, that tells me that they might be trying to move out Carlson. If they're targeting more that shutdown guy, maybe they try to, tandem with Carlson. But it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to the offseason. I think there's going to be a lot of movement. not necessarily big movement, but I think, like I said, we're going to be seeing Kyle Dubas set the table a little bit for the next couple years. I guess the last thing I wanted to add, and we're running out of time here, but I'm interested to see what approach they take next season because, I see a lot of people and I hear the Tank Brigade. I actually talked about this with Pat a couple weeks ago on here. There's a generational talent available next season in Gavin McKenna. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows that the 2026 draft is deep. But I guess when I'm looking at the standings and I'm looking at other teams across the league, it just doesn't seem like the Penguins are as well positioned to tank as some of these other teams. You mentioned Boston. I had to do a double take when we were, in the press box for that last game against the Bruins. I looked at this lineup sheet and I was like, "Oh my God." Like, I didn't recognize half the names on there. Like, Boston has pasta. That's about it. I think they're in a team that's well positioned to tank. I think Philly's kind of still in that mold too. They can't quite figure out the goaltending. They have a little bit of a collection of young talent. I don't think they're ready to take that next step yet. You look at some of these bottom Western teams. I think San Jose might take a step next year. They have a lot in place. Chicago, no way. Seattle's in a good position to tank. Anaheim, I still am not convinced that they're, anywhere closer to competing. So if you really get down to the nuts and bolts of this, Pittsburgh still has Sidney Crosby. They still have high-end talent that some of those other bottom teams lack, even if they ship some of it out. I just can't see a situation where they're drafting high enough next year to warrant them actively trying to tank. I think it's going to be another situation where they're not going to intentionally tank, but they're not going to intentionally try. And, I think we'll settle for a top 10 pick kind of situation, similar to this year.
Yeah, especially during the free agency period, you're going to see similar moves, I think, to what they did last year. Like, everyone was like even me, like, I was like, oh, like, why are you bringing Anthony Beauvillier in? But then, I think about it a little bit. It's like, yeah, because they're rebuilding on the fly. Like, they gave him top 6 minutes and then they got a really good return for him at the deadline. Still would have liked to see them get a decent return from Matt Grzelcyk, but they wanted to keep him, I guess, whatever. I would have still traded him, but I'm also not Kyle Dubas. But at least during free agency, again, I think you're not going to see a lot of movement. You're going to see a lot of these teams just spend a lot of money because, again, free agency, that's not where you build your team. You build it through a little bit through the draft, you build it through trades, all that other stuff. You go to free agency to plug in like a couple holes that you have, say third line, something like that. You don't go into free agency, looking to sign all that top tier talent and then like, oh, like we're going to really go all in to make the playoffs. Like, you get the generational talents usually another way. That's the big thing. But I think with the Penguins, they're still going to be busy this summer, but a lot of their moves are going to be via trade and all that good stuff. Like, I don't think you're going to see some pure legit signings. Like, you're not going to see him go out there and sign anyone to a 4 or 5 year term. I would be very surprised. Like, heck, Blake Lizotte was the only player they signed to a term greater than 1 year last year. Wouldn't be surprised if we got something similar to that this summer, where again, it's kind of 1 year deals to players who can maybe fill in the bottom 6 if needed, maybe someone that can play in the top 6 is needed if needed. If they also trade Rickard Rakell, for example, he's obviously going to be out there very much in trade talks. And I do think there's going to be a lot of interest in him, because when teams don't get the players they want in free agency, or maybe some players come off the trade market, some of these teams might come circling to the Penguins and Kyle Dubas being like, hey, we know you had him available around the trade deadline. Do you still have the same price now, or has it lowered a little bit? So, and Kyle Dubas kind of hinted at during one of the GM shows after the deadline that he kind of knows what the market is going to be, and he can maybe take advantage of that if some teams really come calling in or are a bit desperate to trade for Rakell. But again, in terms of offseason plan, obviously it's about getting that bona fide top pairing guy for the left side, probably via trade. Otherwise, you're looking for other players via trade. It's also probably going to be mostly young players. Like, I don't think they're going to go out there and acquire 30-plus-year-old veterans to fill out these roles. Like, I think you're just going to see as many young players as possible come in via trade to really, at least again, prove that they belong in the NHL.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's going to be anything big this summer. I would be interested to see if Mitch Marner makes it to free agency, which I don't think he's going to. But if Kyle Dubas kind of just calls and kicks the tires a little bit just to kind of get a feeling out for that. But that's a very hypothetical situation. I don't think he's going to make it to free agency anyway, so it's probably not going to be a conversation. But it'll be interesting to see how big they shoot in the RFA market. I'm kind of curious to see if they do, really try to target one of those guys, like you said, like a left defenseman, maybe even a second line center somewhere. There's options there. And this draft isn't super deep with centers either. I mean, their best shot at a center is probably Jake O'Brien. He's kind of, his draft stock has risen pretty considerably. I still don't think he's drafted, top 6 probably, but there is a chance somebody, bites just before the Penguins, assuming that they don't win the lottery, of course. So, that's all I had today. Is there anything you wanted to add, Hunter?
No, I can definitely say though, Jake O'Brien, if he's there at 9, if Eklund and Frondell are gone, I would race up to the podium and draft him. Dude is absolutely filthy with the puck on his stick. The amount of dangles that I see him perform with the tape on, it's tremendous. He has a lot of high-end skill. I don't think he'll be ready this year, maybe the year after, or the year after that. But if he's there and Eklund and Frondell are gone, I race up to the podium. He's that good.
Yeah. See, it's tough for me. I don't know that even if Eklund's available, I really like O'Brien. I've watched a lot of film on him.
He's good.
And he's so smart. And the Penguins, I mean, I'm not one of those people who are really married to the idea of drafting for positional needs. I think at the end of the day, you should just take the best player available. But it's kind of hard to ignore that the Penguins have a really glaring need for center depth in their organization. So it'll be kind of interesting to see, how they go about that and how that affects their drafting, especially if, 2 of those 3 guys are available even at that point. So we'll see. It should be a good draft year, but Hunter, want to give them a little bit of a reminder of where they can find you and what you're working on?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies. You can follow my co-host Patrick Damp on Blue Sky at Synonym for Wet. And you can follow the show wherever you get the podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, the Roku channel, all that good stuff. We have episodes Monday through Friday through early July until we go down to 3 episodes a week. And we just had Jesse Marshall on today. Well, I had Jesse on today. Pat still doesn't have power where he's at in the North Shore. The nasty storm came through on Tuesday, so he cannot join the show today. But don't worry, he'll be back tomorrow on Friday, and we'll be discussing all the latest news, continuing the season reviews, and all that good stuff.
Awesome to hear. Luckily, that storm kind of got hit here, but our power didn't go out. I never lost power, so I was one of the lucky ones.
Same.
So yeah, best wishes to Pat. I know some of my family's been without power for a couple days now. I've had people stopping in to take showers and cook food. So hopefully Pat's doing okay. But yeah, just as a reminder as well, give us a follow, Pucks and Nat Podcast on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Pucks and Nat, Pucks_Nat_pod on X. Same thing without the underscores on Blue Sky. And I'm Kelsey Surmacz, your host. You can find me on the Hockey News Penguins website. I'm going to be doing a lot of draft coverage over the next couple weeks, as well as, just following the coaching search, because that's obviously going to be the big story. So thanks for listening, guys, as usual. As I said last week, this is going to kind of be a semi-irregular thing this summer as I kind of figure out the situation with the co-host and just what else is going on. I'm going to try to bring this to you every Wednesday, but it might be, an every other week sort of thing. I'll keep content coming. I'll promise you that much. But thanks again for listening, and thanks to Hunter for joining us once again. And stay out of trouble, Nat.